All electronic gaming can trace its roots back to the early 1970s. Here stood the arcades, where the first games and venues for gamers were first conceived. It was here that the classics that we love today were first created. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Space Invaders all got their starts here, and it was here that all gaming kind owes its existence to. Only a few years into the spark of gaming, home consoles began to appear. For the first few years, and up until the third generation, these consoles were only a minor market for gaming. It wasn't until 1983 and the release of the Famicom, or the NES here in the States. It was this console, and the beginning of the third generation of home consoles, that things began to shift. As the third generation rolled into the fourth, another contender was beginning to rise in the crowd of the growing market: PC gaming. For years, PCs were highly limited in their hardware and software, and as the 90s began, this would be where the PC gaming regime would truly begin. This is how it's been for years now. A market divides separately into its own little groups. Following their renaissance into the early 90s, arcades were still a very big following across much of the world. The grasp of consoles and PCs on their part of the market had not yet taken hold. Here, they flourished as tech was improving. We're talking about motion controls, semi-3D graphics, and it was the big saving grace for these arcades: fighting games. As gaming reached into the mid-90s, both consoles and PCs were starting to step up their game. Both had finally achieved true 3D rendering in gaming. While not as advanced as arcade systems, both consoles and PCs were catching up and finally surpassed what arcades could do. As the new millennium began, arcades went to severe drop-off. They simply could no longer compete one-on-one with consoles or PCs anymore, especially with the inclusion of internet-based multiplayer. Thousands of arcades across the country were closing, and only places like Chuck E. Cheese were strong enough to be able to survive all this. As of today, there's only a small blowback of arcades, but nothing to the large extent that it was at its peak. The only place that arcades did not fall was in Japan. In an act of sheer amazement, old arcade rivals joined together to keep the industry alive and vibrant in the country. The decline of arcades led to consoles becoming the biggest market for gaming. There had once been over a dozen consoles, big and small, that each carved themselves a piece of the pie for themselves. As the years went on, some of these smaller console producers, such as Sega and 3DO, were pushed out of the market by big ones like Nintendo, Sony, and eventually Microsoft. Since the end of the sixth generation, no new companies have been able to rise up to contend with the big three. Here, Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft have duked it out solely in the console wars for the last 15 years now. Nowadays, it is believed Nintendo is moving away from traditional gaming into a more niche market, segmented away from the other two. We'll get to why the consoles might be declining in a minute or two here. True PC gaming began with side ports and clones of popular arcade games such as Frogger, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong. Following the video game crash of 1983, the console market shrank, but the PC's multiple purposes gave them a better leg up when the console market was recovering. Alas, the PC market saw trouble with the high success of Nintendo's NES. This caused many to think that the market for PC gaming was just simply doomed. This was proven wrong, and with the internet and online play becoming more prevalent in the late 90s and early 2000s, PC gaming was about to make an explosion onto the market again. As the price for hardware to run these games at the same level or higher than the consoles began to become more apparent, many people began to drift away from consoles and more into PC gaming. Today, the rise of online multiplayer games like Rust and League of Legends, modding for games like Fallout and Skyrim, and the wide array of free games on places like Steam have created a flourishing market. The gap between revenue from consoles and PCs has been shrinking over a decade now. This means that changes are about to occur, but what is truly coming? There There was something interesting that I saw this year while watching E3, and it was coming from the Xbox conference. Here, all of the exclusives that they were announcing were also being tied into the Windows 10 store. Now I'm going to rev up my conspiracy cap and formulate something. Now, Microsoft is probably going to discontinue the Xbox eventually, and now they're just starting to build up their deck of content library to the Windows 10 store for when that transition is complete. It wouldn't be shocking to think about that, since Xbox does run on a modified Windows system, along with Sony running on some weirder, more Linux-based computing software. But it's just a thought. Regardless, it seems apparent to me at least that consoles are going to go the way of arcades, being outpaced both by the variety of games and the hardware becoming obsolete. But like arcades, consoles can exist as a novelty for people to enjoy. Though, if rivals can put past their differences and keep their industry strong like they did in Japan, then perhaps things might be different. But I'll say, that's a story for another day.